9. Neoplatonism and modern man. The Michael Wigglesworth of the 19th century was Karl Marx. It is not our purpose to examine closely or more than in passing the philosophy of Marx. For Marx, the dialectic was one of nature and freedom, or spirit. The material world of nature is a threatening and evil world when it dominates man as it does in capitalism. Freedom means the capture and total control of the material world by the mind or spirit of Hegel, which would incarnate itself in the dictatorship of the proletariat and free man from bondage to work and from alienation. Bondage for Marx was work, being tied to the material world. For Marx, freedom meant this, quote, "The shortening of the working day is its fundamental premise," end quote. Freedom, thus, was the triumph of spirit by controlling the material world and by releasing man as far as possible from work. In the same passage, Marx began by declaring that, quote, "The realm of freedom does not commence until the point is passed where labour under the compulsion of necessity and of external unity is required," end quote. Friedrich Engels stated the case in good Neoplatonic terms when he called for, quote, "the ascent of man from the kingdom of necessity to the kingdom of freedom," end quote. Unlike previous Neoplatonism, in which individual spirits made the ascent from the realm of necessity, the material world, into the realm of freedom, the spiritual world, Marxist ascent was social. Isidor Scheidner, literary editor of The New Masses, wrote a novel to set forth this thesis, and his hero came to the following decision at the end of the book, quote, "He has set out from the kingdom of necessity. He had found a way out, the escape from his class, only to find that, outside, he was homeless. He was to learn that no one enters the kingdom of freedom alone. He would return to his class. With it, he would march, taking his place in the advancing lines in the irresistible movement of the masses of mankind from the kingdom of necessity to the kingdom of freedom," end quote. Basic to Marx's Neoplatonism was his theory of value. For him, as he evaluated products, it was definitely not the materialistic marketplace and its supply and demand that governed value. For Marx, quote, "The value of each commodity is determined by the quantity of labour expended on and materialised in it, by the working time necessary under given social conditions for its production," end quote. Value was thus removed from the marketplace and determined instead by labour, and labour meant something which was, quote, "materialised," end quote, in a product. In other words, value was a consequence of an idea becoming materialised by labour. The marketplace must not govern because it is the crass world of material reality as against the pure world of mind or reason. As North has observed, quote, "Marx demanded an economic paradise where there would be no scarcity, no uncertainty, and no capitalist entrepreneurship. It is only this kind of world which can dispense with profits. Marx wanted heaven on earth, or more accurately, he wanted an escape from time and the curses which time has brought. His vision of socialism ultimately required a static universe in which there would be no change whatsoever, or at least where all change could be accurately predicted and controlled. Because the capitalist system failed to meet this requirement, he rejected it as the creation of an alienated mankind, a temporary period which would come to an end with the revolution. He castigated the capitalist for deviating from the utopian conception of a perfect world," end quote. North's statement is an excellent summary of the implications and goals of a socialised Neoplatonism. In more ways than one, Marx resembled Wigglesworth. Somewhere in his youth, Wigglesworth had apparently fallen into sexual troubles and perhaps contracted gonorrhea. Marx had seduced, or more likely raped, his wife's servant, a faithful woman who guided the improvident Marx family with common sense and dignity. A son was born. As Paine has commented, quote, "For Marx, wrapped up in his dreams of revolution and power, the birth of a bastard son was an unmitigated tragedy, a shadow falling over all the remaining years of his life. His life was devoted to the creation of a revolutionary legend of heroic proportions. In this legend, the rape of a servant girl could have no place. He therefore repudiated the child, refused as far as possible to have anything to do with it, and made no attempt to support it. Many years later, he met his son, but it was a very brief meeting. The son did not know he was seeing his father." End quote. Wigglesworth despised the flesh, but found sex a continual temptation. Marx despised capitalistic materialism, but he was continually seeking wealth. During much of his life, Marx had a very high income at his command, but he spent much of it in foolish speculation on the stock exchange, trying to get rich quick. Ironically, Marx, like other Neoplatonists of the early centuries, was plagued by physical ailments. Paine tells us that Marx's body was for 20 years of his life covered with ulcerous boils and carbuncles, quote, exuding a stench which drove people away, end quote. Quote, there were periods of quiescence and other periods when his whole body seemed to break out in ulcerous sores. Like Job, he protested vehemently, accusing the fates of reserving a special malediction for him alone, end quote. The rejected material world was exacting its price for Marx's rejection. The Neoplatonic hope had been made a social goal by Marx, and the artists soon shared it. One of the results was a characteristic hatred of material reality and, quote, a protest against the ugliness of industrialism, end quote. Art, when Christian, has stressed grace, not nature, realism. Humanistic art of the Renaissance, Neoplatonist to the core, began by stressing nature, realism, and moved into a slavish adherence to the idea of nature in neoclassicism. Modern art has rejected grace and nature alike to affirm the Neoplatonist spirit, usually in the anarchistic, individualistic sense. The goal of modern art is to express the inner world of the spirit. Art requires justification, as do all human activities. Having lost its Christian justification, art sought a humanistic one. There has thus been a relentless search for meaning and justification, thus far fruitless. The void has been filled by giving priority in an earlier era to technique, and now to novelty. The classical emphasis on lines, on form and structure, the romantic addition of new subjects, pastoral motifs, humanized animals, and so on, these things have been the main line of development in art, and each development has been revealed as empty by its imitators and then abandoned by all. Hatred of the middle class, the, quote, materialistic, end quote, people of society, became the mark of the bohemian and artist, also of the intellectual. Even de Tocqueville shared this temper, holding that a moral order could come only from the aristocracy or the lower class. As Cesar Grana points out for the writers and thinkers of the day, quote, meaningful values were by definition non-utilitarian values, end quote. The world of values was seen by them as the world of mind or spirit, and definitely not to be associated with the material world and its representative middle class. Because the materialistic world and its middle class had been rejected, the quote-unquote materialistic morality of biblical religion also had to be rejected, and it was an intellectual necessity to be a bohemian and an outcast. One young literary aspirant of 19th century France remarked, quote, I would give half my talents to be a bastard. What a beautiful play I would then write, end quote. In the 20th century, this concept of the bastard received further development at the hands of Jean-Paul Sartre. Full development for man was interpreted as meaning a radical break with bourgeois morality and materialism. Values for Sartre are existential. They come directly out of the uncontaminated spirit of man, uninfluenced by religion and the past and ungoverned by the material world of history. Man's spirit, when free, begets the idea, which is true value or morality. Then everything that man does is a value. The false bourgeois world of material values must be destroyed. As Molnar has pointed out, quote, Superficially seen, the anti-bourgeois, the bastard, belongs to the class of the modern hero in literature, morally free and nonconformist in action. But the theme of the modern hero must be decisively transformed before it becomes usable in the Sartrean world. Here the bourgeois world is not only left behind, it becomes the anti-world whose substance and structure cannot be merely ignored, but must be destroyed in order to attain total metaphysical liberation." End quote. This alienation from the material world is the modern stance. To be interested in commerce and material things is evidence of anti-intellectualism to the new Neoplatonism. Quote-unquote nature as an abstraction is honoured, but nature is divorced from material reality, from the world of hard material necessity, in favour of nature as an expression of spirit. Among the beatniks and then the hippies, this contempt of materialism and the flesh took the classic form of neglect of dress, matted hair and dirty bodies, and a sexuality which treated sex with contempt. Sex for many was divorced from morality, except the existentialist morality of the free spirit, giving value to the moment. Sex meant quote-unquote love in this existentialist and fleeting sense, not in the hard material sense of work and support, a household and its work, faithfulness and attention to everyday physical necessities and the like. Such things were seen as materialistic strangulations of the spirit, of love. The Neoplatonistic separation of spirit and body was far gone. In medicine, the failure to come to a recognition of the biblical nature of mind and body has led to a crisis. According to Pedro Entralgo, a professor of the history of medicine, Occidental medicine, despite scientific progress, is in, quote, a grave and continuous impasse, end quote, because it, quote, has been able to consider human illness only from the point of view of the quote-unquote physical side of man's being, if it has not arrived at the extreme of identifying quote-unquote nature or physis with quote-unquote body. The attempts to escape from such a perspective, Paracelsus, Van Helmont, medical romanticism, have been as ineffective as misguided, end quote. Man has never ceased to be material by despising the body. It has usually aggravated his materialism because it has denied it a normal expression, as in Wigglesworth. Similarly, man has never ceased to be spiritual when he has denied the spirit. Instead, he has fallen prey then to a false and fanatical tyranny of the spirit, as in Karl Marx. Neoplatonism leads to a contempt for time and history. Cornelius van Til has called attention to the parallel between the development from Aristotle to Plotinus and from Descartes to Kant. Such philosophies must deny the biblical faith as impossible, in particular the incarnation, because, quote, nothing unique can be identified with anything historical, end quote. The historical world, the world of matter, cannot be the world of the incarnation in any biblical sense. In ancient and modern philosophies, this is equally true. Quote, in the case of each of these, the would-be autonomous man first assumes that by the powers of his logic he can determine what can and cannot exist. In true Parmenidean fashion, he determines that there can be no such thing as a really significant temporal experience. There can be no creation out of nothing. There can be no incarnation of the Son of God. If he is the Son of God, then he is an eternal, changeless principle. If the Son of God becomes identical with Jesus as a man, then he has accidentally fallen from his status of divinity and must himself be saved by being absorbed into himself as an eternal principle. When, therefore, Gnostics were seeking friendly relations with Christianity and called themselves Christians, this was ultimately, whether fully known to themselves or not, an effort of the natural man to absorb the kingdom of God into the kingdom of Satan. End quote. Where any element of Neoplatonism exists, the Bible is misunderstood and misinterpreted. Man is handicapped in his ability to recognize the nature of reality and is blinded to the basic moral issues of his existence. In both evangelical and modernist theologies, the virus of Neoplatonism is strong and deadly. Only by a return to a systematically biblical theology can the vitality of Christian faith and action be restored. In non-Christian thought, Neoplatonism dehumanizes life because it denies individuality in favor of universals, and it seeks to end history and institute a timeless order, or, despairing of this, it denies universals in favor of particulars and exalts the moment as the only reality. Neoplatonism, by its misinterpretation of the nature and psychology of man, has also worked to dehumanize man. In Marxist orders, the goal is to incarnate scientific reason in the political order and to strip it of material and passionate considerations. The Soviet leaders, such as Stalin and Molotov, adopted these new names to indicate their transcendence of their old nature. They were now steel and hammer in the service of the pure reason of the general will of history. The studied rootlessness of modern education after Locke, the mind as a blank tablet, has produced the modern intellectual. The mind as a blank tablet, a concept which underlies modern psychologies, including behaviorism, is a Neoplatonist development. The clean slate mind can supposedly be developed into a passionless, rational and scientific mind that functions as pure reason. The net result of the Neoplatonic fantasy is that it has produced with its dialecticism the modern diabolism. By attempting to transcend humanity, Neoplatonist man has had to declare war against humanity. Nietzsche held that Christianity was a life-denying faith, only to produce himself the most life-denying faith of Western history. Man had to be destroyed to make way for Superman, a passionless fiction and a life-denying monster. In The Genealogy of Morals, Nietzsche held that the ascetic ideal was the, quote, hate of the human and even more of the animal and more still of the material, end quote. With great clarity he saw the issue and in telling words summed up the deadly goal of the ascetic ideal. Instead of a will to life, it was clearly a will to death or to nothingness. Quote, this horror of the senses, of reason itself, this fear of happiness and beauty, this desire to get right away from all illusions, change, growth, death, wishing and even desiring all this means, let us have the courage to grasp it, a will for nothingness, a will opposed to life, a repudiation of the most fundamental conditions of life, but it is and remains a will. And to say at the end that which I said at the beginning, man will wish nothingness rather than not wish at all, end quote. But Nietzsche himself came to wish for death and nothingness like a good Neoplatonist. He denied man, and he denied God in favour of a myth of reason, Superman. By denying God, he denied the levelling equality of men before God, and because men stand before God not in terms of their works, but his grace and work, because Nietzsche held that God had died, men's equality was gone. Quote, God hath died, now do we desire the Superman to live, end quote. Man must be surpassed. Nietzsche's feeling toward, quote, the populace, mishmash, that wisheth now to be master of all human destiny, oh, disgust, 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 end quote. Nietzsche poured out his contempt and hatred of man in the name of Superman, a figment of his Neoplatonic imagination. He cites also the, quote, last sin, end quote, or temptation of Zarathustra, the champion of Superman. It is, quote, fellow suffering, end quote. This temptation he rejects, quote, fellow suffering with the higher men, he cried out, and his countenance changed into brass. Well, that hath had its time. My suffering and my fellow suffering, what matter about them? Do I then strive after happiness? I strive after my work, end quote. Nietzsche ended with, quote, a repudiation of the most fundamental conditions of life, end quote. He ended with a repudiation of man, and of any passion for man. Man, for him, as for all Neoplatonists, was the abstract man of their imagination, whether called man or Superman. In every case, Neoplatonism is at war with reality. It dreams of playing God and recreating man, but in its dream, man becomes a Frankenstein monster, an impossibility in whose name the real man must be sacrificed. In its mildest forms, it still depersonalized man, as witness Thomas Moore allowing his daughters to be examined naked like livestock by a suitor before the man took his choice of one of them. In this, Moore was faithful to the standard he had laid down in his Utopia. This war against humanity became very vocal in the life, thought and action of the 20th century. The goal of Henry Miller's sexuality is in large measure anti-sexual. By his own statement, the goal is to be, quote, inhuman, end quote, and man must, quote, rip out his entrails, end quote, and become passionless. Quote, side by side with the human race, there runs another race of beings, the inhuman ones, the race of artists who, goaded by unknown impulses, take the lifeless mass of humanity and by the fever and ferments by which they imbue it, turn this soggy dough into bread, and the bread into wine, and the wine into song. Out of the dead compost and the inert slag, they breed a song that contaminates. I see this other race of individuals ransacking the universe, turning everything upside down, their feet always moving in blood and tears, their hands always empty, always clutching and grasping for the beyond, for the God out of reach, slaying everything within reach in order to quiet the monster that gnaws at their vitals. I see that when they tear their hair with the effort to comprehend, to seize this forever unattainable. I see that when they bellow like crazed beasts and rip and gore. I see that this is right, that there is no other path to pursue. A man who belongs to this race must stand up on the high place with gibberish in his mouth and rip out his entrails. It is right and just because he must. And everything that falls short of this frightening spectacle, anything less shuddering, less terrifying, less mad, less intoxicated, less contaminating, is not art. The rest is counterfeit. The rest is human. The rest belongs to life and lifelessness. When I think of Stavordjian, for example, I think of some divine monster standing in a high place and flinging to us his torn bowels. In The Possessed, the earth quakes. It is not the catastrophe that befalls the imaginative individual, but a cataclysm in which a large portion of humanity is buried, wiped out forever. End quote. This Neoplatonic Superman must move always through, quote, blood and tears, end quote, trampling humanity underfoot. He is a failure, Miller says, if he is not murderous and, quote, contaminating, end quote. He is then, quote-unquote, counterfeit and, quote-unquote, human. He, quote, belongs to life and lifelessness, end quote, to the passionate world of birth and death, rather than the world of pure reason, pure spirit, Geist or mind, to use Hegel's terms. The goal is that, quote, a large portion of humanity, end quote, be, quote, buried, wiped out forever, end quote. Any thoughtful evaluation of the 20th century and its wars, its slave labour camps and concentration camps, its universities and its schools must conclude that this war is in progress. It will not cease until the philosophy which undergirds it is rooted out and man again placed under God in his sovereign word. In Van Til's words, quote, the self-attesting Christ will yet gain victory, but he will gain it when theologians, philosophers and scientists and all that have cultural responsibility reassume afresh the mandate given to Adam to subdue the earth to the praise of its Maker and Redeemer. End quote. The Neoplatonist has a bitter hatred of life because he neither made it nor can control it. Therefore, he seeks to destroy it. And few are as honest as Miller in expressing their urge to destroy and kill. As wisdom declared long ago, he that sinneth against me wrongeth his own soul. All they that hate me love death. End quote. Proverbs 8:36. While some Neoplatonists work for the death of man, others proclaim him an illusion. Dewey, in modern form, saw the individual psychology as illusory, as unimportant. Mary Baker Eddy saw only universal mind as truly existent. The individual as well as matter are for Christian Science an illusion. However, salvation for these and others is always an individual matter, and God's Word gives no evidence of such a general and total decree. The Neoplatonists' haters of life are thus doomed to disappointment. They may find some consolation in their little private corners of hell.